Back to another episode of Buckle Up with Simon and Brian, an ultra running conversation. Simon, you look tired.
Yeah, I'm always tired, Brian. I think I'm just old, really. But quite frankly, I'm also just jet lag and tired from traveling. I was pretty far away. I think it was. We checked on the map, and I was at the furthest point I could be from my home on the planet, basically,
Just the
which
other
is
side of the actual planet.
essentially yes.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was.
it was
It
out there.
was.
It was off the coast of Africa, off the coast of Madagascar, in the what island was it?
It's on the yeah. So I did the Diagonal de Fou of the Grand Raid on the Réunion Island. It's a pretty big and famous race, especially if you are not from the US. Then you definitely know about it. It was huge. It was quite an adventure. It was a very challenging race, but it was also a race that was really, really, really far away.
Like really far away. Like how long did it take you to travel there?
Um, I want to say about 30 to 36 hours one way.
Jeez,
Yeah, depending where you start counting, yes.
that's a lot of time. And then there's time zones in there, and you're getting ahead of yourself and behind yourself, and all those things, right?
Yeah, when we were on the car coming back from the airport yesterday with Nora, she asked me, "So where are you jet lag wise?" And I was like, "I have no clue right now if like I'm supposed to feel like it's the morning or the evening. All I know is like I'm falling asleep
That's funny.
anytime right now."
Yeah, our last guest was the guy that ran Moab, who successfully finished. We're talking about Don Nisley, and Don, when he showed up here in Colorado, he kept saying he was trying to stay on East Coast time, and I was like, man, why would you do that to yourself? Like, why don't you just try to adapt? You're going to be here for 8, 9, 10 days. Like, just try to convert over and eat breakfast at a normal time, like everyone eats breakfast in the mountains, instead of trying to eat breakfast at 4 a.m. Whatever the difference is. But either way,
Yeah, well, you know what I did with time zone actually is I was still working California time when I was there. So that was a 13-hour difference, which is not great, by the way. I don't think anyone should try and do that.
yeah,
But yeah, essentially it's 7 in the evening, and then I start my day over there, and then I work all through the night. Not great. The only advantage is that once we were racing in the night, I felt like it was the middle of the day, so I was not nearly as tired as I could have been, which was helpful, especially the first night. I went through it like no problem.
nice. Yeah, I guess you
Yeah,
have
but
to if you're trying to work, on your local time zone, and you're halfway around the world on the other side of the planet. Gosh, I guess they're going in the summer over there, and it's an island, so it's probably pretty warm and pretty tropical. Yeah, all those things.
it was all of these things, yes, and yeah, I mean it's an island. It's a tropical island. It was hot, humid. I don't know if they have season to the point of saying like this is winter and this is summer. Maybe it's more like raining season type of thing, a little bit like Hawaii, if you're
Well,
familiar
that's
with
kind of
kind
like
of
where
the
you're at
season
in San
over
Diego
there.
too, right? I mean, that's pretty similar to San Diego. I mean, there's not really a huge swing of seasons. You got sweater season
That's
and
true.
tank top season, and those are the two, you know,
That's
two
very
seasons.
true. That's very true.
So
But
we got this episode here, Simon, and we don't have any guests. We've both been pretty busy. I was in Moab for a bunch of days. You've been traveling around the world, and living out of airports for 30 plus hours on each direction. And so we don't have any interesting guests this week. So we're going to break this down, and it's just going to be you and I. We're going to share our last adventures and talk about what's coming up for us in the near future. And we hope you tune in and enjoy this episode.
yeah, I kind of disagree with you, Brian. I think we have two very interesting guests today. That's how I would put it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. We'll get right to it.
Hey, Hey, Brian, thanks for coming on the show. It's great to have you here. Um, Brian, you raced Moab last week, and I think the first question on my mind is, how are your knees?
It's a great question, Simon. I did hear that quite a few times in Moab about how are my knees. My knees are fine. I felt decent at leading up to Moab. I was working through an injury that I sustained. It just kind of flared up in Leadville on my Achilles, though. So my knees are fine to answer your question, but my Achilles flared up in Moab or in Leadville a few weeks ago, 7+ weeks ago now, probably 8 weeks ago now. And I was able to get through Leadville. I finished. I mean, it wasn't pretty. I had like 35 minutes left before the final finish time of 30 hours. So I was in the golden hour. We were all there together. We probably rehashed that a few times already. But I was on the mend of the Achilles issue. I felt like I was giving it some rest. I was riding the bike a little bit to keep some fitness going. I felt strong going into Moab, but after 65 miles, 67 miles or so, actually prior to that, quite honestly, the Achilles started to flare up pretty good, and I hadn't done any of the significant climbing just yet, and I'm kind of, anticipating 170 more miles on an Achilles that wasn't feeling great. Just was not in the cards for me. So yeah, unfortunately, I had a DNF. It's a tough pill to swallow. I know you haven't had that experience, but I haven't had one in 7 years. My last DNF was 2017 at Run Rabbit Run, which is a challenging event as well, and I think I DNF'd there at about mile 45 or so. It was a different course back then, but in any case, so it's been a while since I've had a DNF, but it was a hard decision to make. Um, Challenging always, but hindsight now being 2020, I'm like 10 days removed from Moab, and I'm pretty certain it was the right decision to make. And I can't change the outcome now anyway, but I'm living with the fact that I think it was still the right outcome. The right decision to make is to pull the plug and live to run another event, as opposed to the potential of kind of snapping that Achilles and having just a long year of rehab and recovery, maybe some surgeries or something awkward. I have a To get a little deeper into the Achilles issue, I have a heel spur, a pretty significant one. It's probably a decent quarter inch or a third of an inch raise on the back of my heel that is rubbing on the Achilles and just irritates it. And so and it was getting hot and burning and just different sensations that weren't like a normal like soreness. And I was thinking, all I kept thinking is that I'm trimming this thing down, and at some point it's going to give. So I did pull the plug.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Brian, that's a very, very convoluted way for you to just say that your knees are fine. That's all I heard, really. So I'm so glad to hear that your knees are fine. Everything is good. But no, seriously, I mean, I'm very sad about it. Of course, I was following it. I actually, while it was happening, I mean, there was a little bit of a jet lag, but never the outcome you want. And it's true, you haven't had one in quite a long time. And I think we can step back a little bit for anyone who's not familiar with Moab 240. I mean, I can present it a little bit and you can fact check me or correct me a little bit. But Moab 240 is becoming or has become kind of the biggest 200 miler in the US. I think it's probably the most famous. It's one of the flagship race from Candice at Destination Trail Racing. So we had Candice a few episodes ago, where there's essentially the big three that she's doing, which is Tahoe 200, Bigfoot 200, and then Moab 240. And Moab 240 is a 240 miles around Moab. Wow, Simon, you're giving great information there. But which means it's kind of in the southwest a little bit. But I'm not super familiar with the course myself, but what I do know is that it will start kind of in a more warm, really hot place. But you do have a significant amount of climbing, and you go probably to what, 9,000 feet of elevation, right? So yeah.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Simon. It is the end of the Triple Crown, and there was a handful of participants still participating in all three events, all three 200 plus milers this season. Some of them that we've had on the show, like Gandhi. Don Nisley was there just doing the 200. He was just on for his first 200, which he successfully did. And others, like you mentioned, Candace being on as well. Yes, Moab is one giant circumnavigation of eastern Utah, I'd call it. We run south towards Monticello, and one of the aid stations is Monticello Lake. And then we cross the highway 191, the Utah Highway 191, and then we run back on ourselves through the LaSalle Mountains. And over just before the lake itself, we do go through Bears Ears National Park, which is Shea Mountain area. I think Shea is now the highest point on the course, and it gets up to like 10.5 to be more specific. And I think in the LaSalle's it's like 10.3. So they're pretty equivalent. But some new recent updates to the course last year in 2023 brought a new section to Shea Mountain, which is now the high point of the course. And I think it's 10.5 or 10.7, right in there. So yeah, significant elevation. Moab itself sits at 4,000 feet, 4,200 roughly. So you could see that there's a big influx of climbing in there late, and it's all stacked late in the race. Quite honestly, what I had experienced in the first 70 miles didn't have very much climbing in it for the amount of miles that we covered. I think it was only maybe 4,000 or 5,000 feet in 70 miles, which isn't too significant at all. So very movable terrain. And again, I didn't really even get to those points in the course this year. To have
No, but the segment you were doing has its own challenge, and I think one of the reason that this race is so epic, because by the way, if you're not familiar with it, it is definitely a classic right now. It is really a race worth looking into, and I think what does make it special is really the difference between what you're gonna face at the beginning of the race and then more in the middle. Once you're in these mountains, the condition will be very different, which means that as a runner, you need to be ready to face altitude, but you also need to be ready to face the desert and really the heat of the day. And what I heard was that this year was in fact pretty freaking hot, which creates its own challenges. And just to go a little bit more about the general here, why it's famous. It's quite famous, for example, for Goggin going there, and he actually DNF'd once because he had high altitude embolism, I think, which kind of shows that the altitude there is also a big factor. But at the same time, this year, I think it was Andrew Glaze. So those not familiar with Andrew Glaze, he's running 100-mile at least every week. So a pretty accomplished runner. But he did DNF, and my understanding was it was more related to heat, dehydration, and electrolyte disbalance. So you have two pretty hardcore people that drop for very different reason. One is clearly altitude related. The other one is clearly more kind of heat desert associated. So you have to have a pretty broad experience and set of skills, which you do have though, because I think something that is important to mention before we dive into the specific of this year is that this was not your first rodeo. And I think what Candice has been pretty good is there's almost a cult around these races, right? And you're part of the cult for Moab. You've raced it and completed twice before. So, it's not your first rodeo. And even if you're not there racing, you know this race really well and the people around this race, because every year you're either racing or volunteering at an aid station for several days. So very familiar with the course, right? And the race itself.
That's right. I guess we could back up to the 10,000-foot view, Simon. The race was started in 2017. It was the same year I met Candace. Earlier, before the race, I met her that summer in a different event, and she was sharing with me that she had this race. She was just, the first year she was putting it on. I wasn't sure if I was ready for 240 miles, or I actually kind of knew I wasn't. So I actually paced a future guest of ours, Michael McKnight, for that first year in 2017, and we were chasing Courtney DeWalter, who inevitably won that year outright. Michael was third that year, Mike McKnight was, and I ran through the LaSalle Mountains with him 2018, I never showed up. I just watched it online and sat at home, and it's referred to as the snowpocalypse. They got a ton of snow. They had to reroute a whole bunch of sections up in the high country of that high desert area. So I felt fortunate not to have been a part of that year. But then 19, I showed up and I volunteered. I ran a late aid station. That year I ran, Porcupine Rim. I ran Porcupine Rim aid station that year, which is mile 220. So 17 miles to the finish, down the Porcupine Rim Trail and down the bike path to the finish line. A decent aid station, but gosh, you're right. From the first runner to the last runner, it's about 5 days of worth of aid station volunteering to be out there for the whole time, straight through. And 20, I did complete it during the COVID year. It was one of the few COVID events that we had. I participated in it.
2020 it ran. Okay, that's interesting. I didn't
Yeah,
realize
Utah
that.
was very loose on their outdoor events. They were still allowing a lot of outdoor events, and 200 people and 240 miles. Actually, it was pretty remote still. It still
Yeah,
feels like that.
you keep what your 6 feet distance, no problem.
Yeah, you got a lot of feet between people, so
Yeah, yeah,
not an issue. Some
yeah,
other challenges that year, obviously, which you could all imagine because we all experienced COVID. But
yeah.
2021, I came back
But
and I volunteered, yeah, for a different aid station. 22, I raced, and 23 last year, I volunteered for headquarters, and then was given the mile 200 aid station, which is Geyser Pass. And this year, I participated. So I've been involved in the event every year since its uh, inception, except for 2018. And so, yeah, it is a cult following. I love going there. I'll be there next year. At this rate, probably not running it. I just got other things I want to do. Hopefully I'll be back there in 26 participating at the Moab 240 as a participant. But I haven't missed one, but 2018.
yeah, I mean, we should definitely later talk about. So why would you not do it in 25, and like what's the other plan like towards the end of the episode today? But it isn't really interesting, and I think it really shows also. Well, it shows two things. One is the importance of the community and everything surrounding the race. When people look at race, you either come back to the same because you like the people and the ambience, or sometimes you want to experience something different. And I think you found a great way to do both. In one way is you're still involved in it, but it's going to be very different to be captain at an aid station as opposed to pacing someone and as opposed to racing it. So you get to experience different point of view, and you can save your body for another race, or you race it and like this is a year you're doing it again. But let's talk about this year, because obviously not the outcome we want. I mean, of course I joke about your knees being fine. I mean, that's always good, I guess. But there's other things that are not fine, and maybe we can start kind of with the good, because you did still do 70, or I don't know the specific miles. So it's easy to just like look proportionally and say 70 miles out of 240 doesn't sound like much, but 70 miles is 70 mile. Like this is still a very significant distance. And I think we can talk about that and how did it go. Um, yeah, the training you mentioned a little bit, you were feeling pretty good, but I'm curious, race day happened, you're lining up, you have all of your friends around you, and you're about to go. How are you feeling at that moment?
I'm feeling good. I'm feeling pumped. There's Even though I've been a part of the race every year, there's a growing buzz around the race as well. So it seems that some bigger names are coming out. It's getting to be a little bit of a deeper field. I've had some good results in the past, but just with the lineup this year, you never know. And I wanted to have a good result. I came in with that I could finish strong and kind of. I'm kind of a late runner. Usually I can come from the back with 100 miles to go, especially in the mountains, which is kind of more my natural ability, more so than running the flats of the sands during the day in the heat. So I came in feeling really well and wanted to perform well. I did enjoy seeing all my friends and all the camaraderie, all the volunteers, all the staff that's worked it for years. So it's almost like a homecoming for me to
Mm.
come back to that starting line. It's in it. it's in a campground on the north end of town. But my daughter had a birthday the day before the start, and it started that Friday at noon, which is also new
Uh,
last year in 2013
They should
or
not do that.
2023.
I'm sorry, Candice. We love you, but like, don't start a race at noon. I don't. No, that's not okay.
We'll get into that in a second, because there is a reason behind it. I don't
I'm
know
sure
if it.
there is.
I don't know if
I'm sure
it
she has a good
helps.
reason. You know,
Yeah,
I'm sure she's
yeah,
not doing it randomly. But come on,
yeah, yeah.
it's either you wake me up at 4 in the morning, or like you start way later than that. But the middle of the day, ah man, it's rough.
Yeah, it was. I had a big breakfast at 10, and then I didn't know what to do with myself. So showing up at noon was just kind of a little bit awkward. Um, just a different time of day. Like, I felt pretty relaxed, almost too relaxed, I guess, because it
Mm.
was noon and I hadn't done anything really that morning, obviously, because I had a long potential couple days ahead of me. Um, so yeah,
And
that's how the start went.
were you worried about it? Like, obviously you've done it, and I'm curious how you feel, because when I come in the race, no matter the race, I always have this little bit of nervousness that something bad could happen. I still trust in my ability that I can do it, but I don't know if I will do it. Like, that's how I would describe it, and I never take it for granted. And I'm curious how you feel yourself, especially a race like Moab where it's so freaking long.
Yeah, exactly. I think, I mean, in my coaching practice and talking to other athletes as they push their limits in whatever event they're doing, I think it's good to be a bit nervous at the starting line always. I mean, I think that shows a good respect for the distance that you're trying to cover. And 240 miles is a long freaking way. I mean, like, I don't know where you live if you're listening, but, Google something that you think might be, a 3-4 hour drive away, and then see on like MapQuest if how many miles that is, and you'll get a good idea. From my house where I live, 240 miles is past DIA Airport, which is about a 3.5 to 4 hour drive from my house. So I mean, most
Yeah, I
people
mean, the
don't like to drive
the
that far. I get it, right?
exactly, like, that's the joke, but like, it's true. Like, I mean, I don't want to drive 240 miles,
Yeah.
and it's easy to, like, we can look at distance, but I think for me the comparison I try to do is like, and you don't take the highway, you're on the dirt road on your car,
Mm-hmm.
do 240 miles, and it's like, god damn, that takes forever, and this is so annoying right now. um but we do it for fun. It's
Yeah,
more fun to run than or to
to
power
to
hike
drive it.
than to drive it, for sure. And yeah, a lot can happen in that time. And I feel that even a small thing can happen, and that will be enough to, like, you can't just power through it, especially if it happens through the beginning, right? Blisters can be a huge problem and can lead to like catastrophic failure. And did you have specific concern with your Achilles? Because you did mention, and I remember you at Leadville talking about that. So were you feeling like, if something goes wrong, could be my Achilles, or not really? It was more of a general. I'm a little nervous at the same time, like I'm looking forward to it, but you didn't have a specific.
So just the way my Achilles had flared up at Leadville, it happened at the bottom of the climb, going up Hope. I was actually with Mark and Ryan. We were all three, rubbing elbows and joking and smoking basically in the back there. And as soon as we got to the actual climb across the river, across that little field, and then into the woods, and started going up, that I quickly realized like they were pulling away from me.
Mm.
And probably not a fitness reason behind that. And I kind of knew like it was my Achilles that was flaring up. And so to answer your question, at Moab, I actually was concerned about it, but I actually thought if it was going to happen, it was going to happen much later in the race when we got to the significant climbing in
Yeah, so you were
at Shea
associating it
Mountain.
more to the climb itself than the distance, because for
That's right.
context,
That's
for
right.
people, for the climb at Leadville is around mile 40,
Yeah,
whatever, 38 or 39, right?
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I was expecting to make it to Shea or to the bottom of Shea Mountain, and I think that's roughly 100, 110 miles down the road. So I mean, so I had another 40 to go to get there
Mm.
before I would have done the climb itself, the first climb, and then of course the La Salle's adds another like 8,000 feet of climbing from mile 150 to 200 or so. I'm making up numbers, rough numbers, but right in that mix area. of that.
Mm-hmm.
To get to a geyser pass at the top, you have a little more climbing, but very little. And then it kind of rolls back down to town after that, after mile 200. So I was expecting to have, if I had any concerns, it was going to be later in the race. I did carry some extra like KT tape straps, or like I
Mm-hmm.
pre-cut some extra straps in case I needed to sit down and clean it off and maybe just support it better with some KT tape, and just kind of give it a little extra something. And I don't know. I think there's a placebo effect to it as well. I mean, I don't know how much KT tape is going to hold my Achilles together, but if my head thinks the KT's going to hold my foot
Exactly. I
together,
mean, even if
then
it's just
I feel way
placebo, as
better.
long as it's doing something in your head, that's better than nothing.
Yeah, that's
So,
right. Yeah, yeah, it's a
yeah.
sugar cube, and yeah, and I'll eat the shit out of those things. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, if it's enough to convince your mind to go through, then it's better than nothing, man. That's the duct tape solution. But yeah, so you didn't preemptively tape it, also. Then you were waiting to see if something bad or it felt
yeah,
bad. Then
yep,
yeah.
yep. And leading up to it, I wrote about it in a blog post as well. Leading up to it, I went for a run with Don when he was here visiting with us, and he
Mm-hmm.
said, "Hey, you got a little hitch in your step." I guess that's like a Pennsylvania thing to say or something. But he said you have a little hitch in your step, and
Like
so he
you visibly
noticed.
limping.
Yeah, like I was kind of giving it
Hmm.
a little bit of I was favoring it a little bit, enough that he noticed it, and I said, "Oh man, he noticed it." And then I was emptying the dishwasher a few days prior to that, and I
Yeah.
was walking around the kitchen, and Katie's like, "Hey, like, are you going to be okay to run Moab?" And I said, "Why would you even ask that?" And she said, "Because you're limping around the kitchen, you know." So I guess there was
That's a
still
really
some,
bad sign. Yeah.
yeah, there's some residual, cues there. But of course, hindsight's 2020. I was like, "Oh
Yeah,
no,
of
I'll be
course.
fine,"
Yeah. Yeah, it's yeah. If because I've had and I still do deal with Achilles pain myself and inflammation, and I don't think anyone would ever notice unless I'm really right after a race. But on a like day to day training kind of basis, you would never know. My
Mhm.
prom starts around like 20, 40, 60, but on a training run, like good luck figuring that out. If you visibly are changing your gait, that means that there's definitely something going on that is, yeah, that is not resolved. So yeah. All right. Well,
Yeah, I moved through, first couple aid stations, and
exactly.
I knew it was there, it was lingering. I knew I was just at Leadville as well. I knew I was able to move downhill efficiently, so I took even the little climbs that we had in the first 70 miles, took them fairly easy. Obviously, didn't want to put much stress on it, or less stress on it, and tried to keep up with the groups that I was running with by pushing a little bit harder on the downhills. Yeah, and inevitably I got into Indian Creek, and my wife and family were there. My wife and kids were there, crewing for me. Mark and Leanne were still sleeping off their aid station hangover. They volunteered at the mile 17 aid station, the second aid station called the Masaback,
Mm.
and they manned that. They had a disco themed one, and our friend Leanne, who's been on the show a couple times, she was in a full disco ball outfit. She had like a disco ball skirt and a shirt and a hat and glasses, the whole thing. Yeah, it was pretty funny. They were
Yeah, I saw
really
the
fun and
picture,
really good.
them
Yeah, yeah.
smiling and being happy. It's really, I personally think it's very childish of volunteer to dress up, but I really really appreciate it. Not everyone will enjoy, but there's no negative to it, right? Like nobody's gonna be like, oh, they're dressed up, like that's so fucking stupid. Like I'm so
Yeah.
hardcore, I don't need her to be dressed as a disco ball, but at least one person will like, hey, this is really funny, and they will smile and they will keep going a little longer. So definitely worth the effort, and it makes it more fun also when you're a volunteer to like to have a group costume and these things. So kudos to them and kudos for helping. And that aid station, sorry, that you mentioned just before, where you saw your folks, was that the mile 78 station already, or
It's 67. Yep, and it's the first aid
67?
station we're allowed to get crew after mile 17. It's a good 60. It's the 67 before we're able to see our crew again.
Mm-hmm.
So my
And
wife and the girls came out to Indian Creek, and the side note is, I'm sure you've told Nora, like, don't let me drop, don't let me quit. Keep pushing me out the door. And so when I got to the aid station and I told Katie to turn in my wife Katie to turn in the tracker, she said, "Well, you told me never to let you quit." So we had this argument for about 5 minutes. Where I was like, "Hey, look, I feel fine. Like everything else is working fine. I'm eating, I'm drinking, I'm peeing well. I slept 2 25-minute naps. All the things, everything else was firing, except for my Achilles." And I was like, I'm really kind of worried about more of a long-term injury, and doing some damage as opposed to like, I'm tired and this sucks and I want to quit type of mentality. So I had to convince her to let me turn in my tracker.
And she did her job. She did her
She did
job.
her job. That's right. Yeah, she did what I asked
Uh,
her to do. That's right.
yeah, I think it can be difficult for the crew and especially your spouse. I mean, your spouse doesn't want to see you hurting. So no, I don't tell Nora you don't let me drop because she's a great crew and a great pacer. I don't think she would be comfortable having that role of, no, Simon, you go out there. I don't care if you're injured. I don't care if you're crying. You go out there. I think she's great at everything, but that's the one role that she there's a good cop, bad cop going on with crews sometimes. She cannot be the bad cop. That's not my Nora. But I can see how Katie would be good at it. But both being the good cop and the bad cop. Like if
Yeah.
you told me never to let you drop, I'm not letting you drop. I can see her do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if we just back up just a little bit,
Sure.
when did you start feeling like this is not good? And when did you make the decision of I need to drop? I think I might be doing permanent, maybe permanent damage is not the word, but like I'm getting injured and that could either turn into snapping my Achilles, which then might need surgery, or it becomes a chronic issue and like I never dig myself out of this hole. And like I feel that that's kind of the decision that you made, but it doesn't. I'm curious, like when it started being problematic and when you actually made the decision. If that was at the aid station, if that was before, like walk us a little bit through that.
Yeah, it's a great question. At mile 17, I saw Mark and Leanne. I saw the Masaback aid station crew. Um, Katie was there with the girls as well, my daughters. Yeah, it was a good time. They had music playing. Everyone's in great spirits at mile 17. Most people are in good spirits at mile 17. And so I left the aid station with grilled cheese and bacon in tinfoil wraps for my long trek to the next aid station. There were two other aid stations in there, but they were crewless, and I don't think they're drop bags either. I'm pretty sure there's no drop bags for these two. They're out there. The first one would be base camp, and the next one is Oasis, and then mile 67. So you do have these two, and there's a water drop in between those two. And so it's this huge long stretch. But coming out of the aid station, mile 17, I felt good. I was because of the late start, the canyon walls actually shaded the climb to get up on top of Jackson's ladder. So that felt nice. I was like, I was appreciating some shade because I've never been in there in the shade before. Usually it's still early morning or mid morning at that time on a 7 a.m. start in the past. And so I appreciated that. I came down Jackson's ladder, which is, I don't know, it's probably a technical, it might be a half mile, it might be a quarter mile, but it's just this gnarly descent. If you look at it from like a satellite image, it looks just like a sheer rock wall, but there's a fine little trail in there that bobs and weaves down this crack in some little sand spots in there. And everyone is a little overwhelmed and taken back by it. I was the first time I saw it as well. It's a really cool little spot. But you get to the bottom of it, and then there has been in the past some sand running, and I was fully aware of it. But I think there's been an influx of off-road ATV, off-road vehicles, the side-by-sides, and everyone's out there having a great time and enjoying the land in their own way. But I think what happens is this year the sand was like beach sand, like super dry beach sand, and not like the wet stuff where it's like a little more firm, where the water washes up on it. Way back in the dunes, like that super deep powdery stuff. And I think
like you're sinking a little bit, almost like in
and I
snow.
think that's created from the machines, the side by sides, the four wheelers, the dirt bikers rolling through this road and kind of churning up the sand and making it more loose and loose and loose. because I don't ever remember it
Yeah,
being
I would think
this
that's a huge factor.
and
It's you
and
always see that,
that yeah.
especially with dirt bike. Like it really messes up trails sometimes. But you're right. I mean, everyone enjoys the outdoors in their way. Like that's totally fine that they do it, but it really creates some damage. And I feel sometimes there should be a separation. As like this is a dirt bike anyway for safety. When they blast through a trail, it can come fast if they're not careful, and then on top of that the trail will be difficult. But yeah, and that must have, and I suppose you're mentioning that it must have been difficult on your ankle.
And I think that's where it started to like flare up because I was actually having, even though I
Yeah.
wasn't climbing, it was flat, but I was having to dig my toes in, and it felt like you were trying to take a full step forward, but you're only getting a half a foot, half a step forward because your rear foot was kind of losing its own traction and just getting washed out. And so I was really working the Achilles by pulling on the sand. And I think that's where it started. I noticed it, and I was, I'm trying to find the line of where the hardest sand is inside of this little 2-track road. But to no avail. I'm basically just zigzagging back and forth, and I'm trying to use other people's footprints that are already in front of me. And then, of course, I start to see that like, and of course it's way early in the race, but I can still see that people are catching me now, and like now I'm getting passed by, I've 5 people every mile are catching me. So like I'm moving
Yeah.
much slower than the rest of the crew that is around me, right? So I'm like, oh, this is, and of course that gets in your head and all those things. So I get to base camp and I load up on more fuel, more water. um, I did something there. Oh, my bladder kind of fell apart, and I had to like reattach the hose. It leaked all over the place, and I had to refill it. But I was fine. Otherwise, it was just a minor mishap with my bladder hose.
That
But I
happened
had,
at the aid station.
yeah, it was in the
Okay,
process of
that's yeah.
filling it. Yeah, yeah. Luckily, it was in the
Yeah.
process of filling it, so it wasn't on course. I was still at the aid station. I realized the pack was just soaked, and I couldn't figure out
Mm.
if the volunteer spilled water all over it, and then I realized that the hose was like disconnected and it had been leaking all over myself. So I had to like plug the hose back in, refill the bladder to its full capacity, because this section is the long section, with a water drop in 4 miles, and then a 20-mile section to the next aid station. So 24 miles with no aid. This water drop, they're trying to help us out. I get it. So they're kind of stringing us along with this water drop, but this water drop is those blue buckets out in the middle of the desert, and by the time you
Yeah.
get there, even at nightfall, it was already probably 9 o'clock by the time I got to this water drop, and the water was still hot from the day, like it was hot water, and you're like, oh, I'll
Mm.
take it because it's water, but I'm probably not going to drink it first. So I
Yeah.
held on to it and drank everything else that I had, and was hoping I didn't have to drink this hot water. Um, so in that section that I'm explaining, I'll go back to one other point that we made earlier. That is why there's a noon start now. In years previous, this section is just smoking hot. You're against a rock wall that's on your east side, and the sun is setting now. Typically in a 7 a.m. start, the sun is setting to the west, and you're like in this convection oven. It's just cooking you from the west, and the rock is radiating from the east side of you, and you're just in between the two, just getting smoked. And
Mm.
there's nowhere to hide. There's no shrubs. There's no nothing. Just big rocks. A lot of sand, and that's about it. So that's their reasoning for moving it to the noon start. They're trying to save people on day one. I think one of the years, I think it was 2020, there was some anomaly. I'm making up numbers here, but I want to say there was like 36 DNFs, and 34 of them happened on day one in that section. So
Wow.
another 170 miles, only 2 more people dropped, but in that first 70 miles, 34 of them dropped. So pretty significant number. So I'm sure that's why they were trying to figure out a way to change the process. And so this noon start is their solution to that. Um,
Mm. Do
yeah.
you
So
know if that worked? Actually, I'm curious. Like
I don't know. I
proportionally.
don't. I actually. I guess you're asking me. I didn't make it to day two or fully through a day two to run, but day two is just as exposed. We saw what happened to Andrew Glaze, that you had already mentioned. He
Mm.
got smoked out on the next section between 70 and 120 is another section that you can't have crew access. You're allowed a pacer for that section. But a lot of people weren't really using pacers. I'm not sure if Andrew Glaze had a pacer or not for that section because it's 50
Probably
miles on.
not. I feel he doesn't have pacer very often, and even these 200 miler, he often does it by himself solo.
Mhm.
So he was probably by himself.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big ask too. It's not like, I mean, it's not pacing like a 13-mile section like at Leadville or something like that. This
Yeah.
this pacer jumps on with you in Indian Creek, and you're stuck together um, till 120 to 120 miles. So you're essentially going like 52 miles or 48 miles. So your pacer is an ultra runner right off the get go, and if they aren't, they are by the time you get to Shea Mountain. They're an ultra runner.
Yeah.
They've completed 50 or 48 miles or something like that. So I think we're just kicking the can down to day two, in my personal opinion. But I didn't make it to day two to figure that out. But I really think this
Yeah.
day two is just the same issue. It's
Mm.
super exposed and hot, and so I think we're just putting all the weight onto day two. There are a lot more outs on day two. Um, you're running next to the highway, and so medical can come in and snatch you up if you needed it or anything like that. Whereas on day one, it's pretty remote. There's only the road you're running on is the road to get in and out, and so not much traffic on it at all. Um,
Mm.
so I don't know. I mean, so I think they're saving themselves on a medical issue for day one by running through the night, but day two has the same issues, but there are a couple more outs, and it's probably a little more medically safe.
Yeah. So they can get there faster, which sometimes can be like a safety thing, pretty important. So.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Mm.
Yeah, and then I got to the second aid station. I slept a little bit just before it. I'm not a great person to sleep at the aid station, so it's just too loud, and I'm too much of a light sleeper, even if I am tired. So I dipped behind a rock just before the aid station, about a mile out. Slept for 25 minutes, got back on the trail with the idea that I was going to get to the aid station, just fill up and keep moving because I had now already taken my nap, and it was late or early. I don't know what you want to call it. It was probably like 1 or 2 in the morning or something along those lines. Something, the middle of the night. It's dark, and it's cooling off finally, but it didn't really cool off as much as we thought it would.
Mm-hmm.
So I got all my stuff. I moved out of the aid station pretty well. I ran with the guy that I just met from California. We had a great conversation for a while, but I could tell I wasn't able to keep up with him, and that's kind of like
Yeah.
when it started getting in my head. And I was realizing like he was wanting to run. We were having a great conversation, and I wasn't able to keep up. And I was like, "Hey, man, like no offense, like you're actually moving obviously quicker than I am, so go ahead and push on, man. I'll catch up to you later." We kind of did that part our ways type of thing. And then I had an obvious limp as soon as the sun came up. I was moving to the aid station, and I had this obvious limp, and I was like, this is pretty early to be doing this obvious limp. So yeah, so I think at that point, probably 4 or 5 miles from the aid station is where I kind of like had to like make those decisions, like, all right, like let's try to run through it. Let's see what happens. Let's back off. Let's walk a little bit. And I did I tried all the things, and nothing really was working. I was walking with a limp. I was running with a limp.
Mm.
Everything I did was with a limp. And so I just thought, this isn't going to end well. And then, of course you get in your head, and I was like, this isn't fun anymore. Like, am I really
Yeah.
taking damage? I mean, do I really want to run this weekend, or do I want to run for the next, 2, 5, 10 years, without any, catastrophic
Yeah. I mean,
injuries,
especially that your knees are still good. You gotta take care of everything else, right? I
Yeah, that's
mean,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, so then I
No,
got to the
I'm.
aid station. I convinced Katie to turn in my tracker. We went back to the campground, and I jumped in the pool in the hot tub, and we started watching trackers, and yeah, we went about the rest of our weekend.
Yeah. No, I think it's obviously it's a tough decision. That's not the decision you want to make, but it is the mature decision for sure, and probably the smart. I mean, first of all, nobody knows except yourself, and even yourself, you will never truly know. Although you kind of know, because I think there are issues where we can say, look, let me just try until the next aid station. Like we always say that. We always say like that's what I always tell people. Like don't drop at this aid station. Drop at the next one. Like try to
Mm.
see can you make it to the next one. And if you keep telling yourself that, and you can go pretty far. And you could do that for 200 mile with something like blisters. You could do that 200 mile with chafing or like feeling nausea, vomiting, things like that. But with this, I mean, there is a price to pay to go to the next aid station, as you're making it worse, and potentially instead of just needing, a little bit of PT, and then in 2 months you're 100% back. Now we're talking about like a chronic problem, and like we said, it can snap. Like an Achilles can snap, and that can lead to surgery. And yeah, people are able to come back from that, but that can take years. And I don't know where's the fun in not
Yeah,
being
yeah,
able
yeah.
to like walk in the house anymore. Like that's that's not fun anymore, and that's not being tough. That's just being dumb, I think. So understanding the difference between being hurt and hurting is difficult, and I think you have a lot of experience, and you had to make that call, like that call that nobody wants to do. Like, you don't want to drop, and you had maybe a history of dropping a little bit more before, like that was a little bit more common. But I think the redemption here that you had last year kind of showed that, that's in the past. Like, that's Brian from the past. Now you're good at being like in the game, and like you have problems, and instead of quitting in your head, you go through it, and you
Hmm.
you you did amazing last year with Bighorn. Was difficult condition. Ure was pretty hardcore. um Leadville is always, a fight to the finish. It's a fight to the last hour, and then you do Run Rabbit Run, which is a challenging race. So it's not a lack of mental fortitude. I think it's the opposite. It's an understanding of what you can and cannot do. So
Sure, I
it's
think
unfortunate, but
we challenge ourselves at all these events, and I mean, I think any given day, it might not be your day. You could stand in any starting line, and you could look up the statistics. We'll use Leadville as an example. We'll say there's a 50% DNF rate at Leadville. I think it might be a little bit better, like 53% or something like that. Um, but you could stand there and look around, and like there's all this buzzing excitement, and there's all this nervous tension, and maybe like nervous joking, and all the things that are people each person's experiencing at the starting line. And you could just kind of look around, and you think like half these people or more aren't going to finish.
yep.
And like you start to think like, how am I not going to be part of that as this attrition? Like, what am I going to do different? And and
Yeah.
maybe it's just the
What
reminders to
makes you
eat and
special?
drink. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Like, what makes you so special that it will happen to someone else but not you? And the reality is
Hmm.
like, well, I don't know that. Like, you never know that.
Hmm.
And there are people that are more likely to finish than others. Like, I think that's fair to say. And even when you were describing, like seeing the people pass you, like I've had that feeling sometimes, and it's like it sounds almost judgmental. And I think I'm very encouraging of everyone,
Hmm.
but at the same time, Courtney doesn't have the same ability as I do, or more the other way. That's said the other way around. Like, I don't have the same ability as Courtney, and I think that's okay to recognize that. And I'm pretty good now to gauge people, especially once you're on the trail and running. And sometimes you get it wrong. You're like, oh, there's this person. There's no way that person is finishing, and then they zoom past you. But typically you have a good sense, and it's especially disturbing when you see people passing you, and it's like, I don't think normally someone like that would pass me, and then someone like that, and then someone like that. Like, there's a good, like, these people are passing me, and that's fine. Like, you see Courtney or other pros passing you, it's like, that's not playing in my head at all. Then I see people that I would gauge are like in my same range. I was like, that's fine. And then you start seeing people, it's like, wow, like something is not normal, because you always struggle. And I think that's what's difficult also to gauge is sometimes for me it's the opposite. I'm like, wow, I'm in so much pain right now. I'm struggling so much. And then you look around, like, at the same time, nobody has passed me for the past 5 hours. In fact,
Hmm.
I've passed people. So yeah, I'm struggling, but it seems that I'm struggling not because something is wrong with me, but I'm struggling because something is wrong with the course, and everyone is struggling right now. Everyone
Sure,
is in the
sure.
same boat. Where it's more worrisome is actually, no, actually people are passing me right now, and it's not about, man, like I'm not gonna finish top 10. It's more like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's a sign that I'm struggling more than what the course should be making me struggle
Hmm.
at this point. Like, this is not normal level of tiredness. And it plays with your head. Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah, I
mean,
think the
it's a
last thought I
bummer.
have about the last thought I have about the at Moab, and it's hindsight being 2020. I did, I told Katie to turn in my tracker, and I was ready to be out of there, and I think I should have still taken my own advice, which I give to my athletes, which is I should have taken a big nap and eaten a ton of food and kind of woken up.
I
Um,
I don't know, Brian. I mean, you know it better, right? Like, you're the one who can judge that. But I think it's the trick here that I find difficult is that Brian, I think I know you, and I know you could have pushed to the next aid station for sure, and probably you could have pushed to like 140 miles, but then what, And I think
mhm.
there's also a trap that we fall into, where if you were at that level of pain and injury at mile 200, I think you would have finished. You would say, well, like
Hmm.
shit, man, like I ran 200 miles, let's do 40 more. And that's how you can
Sure.
get injured sometimes. And you get in the trap of, well, I slept 2 hours and sure, I'm falling behind a lot in terms of cutoff, but I can make it to the next one and then the next one. And then at some point you're so deep in it that there's kind of this false, like there's sunk cost fallacy almost, that's going on. It's like, I've put already
Hmm.
so much effort. I can't drop
Yeah,
right
you're
now
you're
just
so
because
vested
like,
in the process that you almost can't
exactly.
get yourself
And
out of it, right?
yeah, and like if you do take the time when it's an injury, and that's where it's difficult. It's drawing the line, like, are you hurting or being tired and kind of being a little bitch, or like you're hurt and you are to some extent being a little bitch about it. And I mean, it's always true. Like, and I
Sure.
appreciate that you recognize it. Like, there is definitely the real injury going on, but also it played in your head. Like, it gets in your
Hmm.
head. What if, and then distinguishing between like, am I over amplifying this right now and like getting this out of proportion, or this is a real situation, and then denying that is just going to make it much worse. And that's where I say, like, people outside of yourself can definitely not know that, because every case is different for Achilles pain. You yourself, even, it's difficult to say, but in retrospect, I mean, are you healthy? Actually, I didn't ask that, but how's your recovery?
Yeah, I mean, I want to run. I mean, because I didn't run 240 miles, so I'm not completely exhausted, you know. And
Mm.
and the 70 I ran was, was not at an effort, I guess. Like I didn't run
Yeah.
70 to finish in
Well,
race
but you were
70.
limping even
Yeah,
before, so like, are you still limping when you're walking around in the
yeah, a
house?
little bit. I ran today, but I wasn't limping this morning. But I'm probably limping this
Yeah.
afternoon after the run, a little bit. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, then full
yeah,
full recovery is so important now, right? And we're in the right season to do that, fortunately. So it's giving you time.
yeah.
So yeah.
Hey, let's get thanks for diving deep into Moab, but let's go back to the beginning of the episode and let's talk about your trip to the Reunion Island there off the coast of Madagascar, off the eastern coast of Africa.
Yeah, I mean, so it's a race that is super famous, and I think it's funny because if you're American, you might not even know about it, which is kind of funny to me, or you might have heard of it but not realize how big of a deal it is. When I think about big races in the world, there's obviously UTMB, like in Europe. Then there's obviously Western State and Hard Rock in the US. Then you can think of Fuji in Asia. And then the next one, I think, is Diagonal de Fou. There were 3,000 runner doing the 100 mile.
Holy
And in
smokes!
total, yeah, that we will get to that. Trust me, we
Holy
will talk
smokes!
about that. I need to vent right now, and we're gonna talk about 3,000 runner. But and the toll, because there's different distance going on at the same time, it's 7,000 runner. So
Oh
for
my
an ultra
god!
marathon that happens on single track for some part, that is a shit ton.
Yeah.
And they use a metric system, so a metric ton of people over there. It's absolutely crazy. But yeah, so
Is
pretty big race. Reunion Island. It's associated to France. I don't know exactly like the political status there, but they speak French over there, and it's a big race, especially for European and French people. I feel that half of the people were French, and the language there was definitely French, which for me was good. I actually don't know if someone doesn't speak French how it would feel, but for me that was actually kind of interesting, to be
hey,
able to understand people.
a weird question. Is it the same French or is it like Texas and New York City? Is it like a different dialect of French? Like, like a little
Well,
play on French?
between them, like between people of Reunion Island and France, I think it's basically the same because there's a lot of people that actually like do the transfer. Like they will go live in the metropole and then they will come
Mm,
back to the island, or vice versa. But my French is pretty different. They recognize pretty much right away. They did not hesitate to say like, "You're from Canada, aren't you?" And then I didn't get all political on them, but I said, "Yes, I'm from Quebec." But that is a touchy subject in theory for some people. Not so much for me, but obviously there's
uh,
political history as to what's the difference between Canada and
sure.
Quebec.
In Quebec,
Myself, I'm
yeah,
more
yeah,
like I'm both, but yeah, it's a little different French, but we understand each other perfectly well. It's
yeah. Hmm.
I would describe it like American and British kind of
Mm.
difference. Like you will not hesitate to notice right away that someone is from England. Like you know it right away,
Hmm.
but you still understand them. Although
But we could still
sometimes like you
converse for
need to
sure.
ask
Yeah.
them to repeat a little bit because like it just sounds weird, or they have a weird expression which out of context you might not understand, but in the context you might actually understand.
Hmm.
And that was pretty much the kind of
Yeah.
the situation. So that was pretty interesting.
It's just like New Yorkers in Texas. It's the same thing.
Yeah, although I think New York and Texas is much closer. Like I think
Mm.
the British to American
Mm.
English is
Yeah.
pretty
There's a
far
lot of different
apart.
words like trousers and blouse, like
Yeah,
for the
exactly.
English type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That,
Okay.
but at the same time, you're exposed enough to kind of know
Hmm.
what they're
Yeah.
saying,
Yeah.
especially for my direction. So I will have heard French movies, and because of that, I can understand their expression better than
Mm.
they can understand mine, where they're not as much exposed to
Sure.
my
Yeah.
French or my Quebecois.
Hmm.
But yeah, so 100 mile, and it's also a pretty challenging course. It's 66-hour cutoff for 100 mile. It's a little more than 100 mile, but that's a whole different story too. But 66 hour is a long time. Ure, which was the hardest
Yeah.
course I had done, and still is the hardest course I've done for 100 mile, was only 52 hours, and that it's 2 miles an hour on average. Now we're talking even less than 2 miles an hour.
Yeah.
But the reason for that is first, there's a lot of elevation gain. It's about, I want to say, 3,500 feet. The course was a little longer this year, so it was closer to maybe 115 mile rather than 100, which does make a difference.
Hmm.
And the course is technical. Oh, and you don't have poles. You would love this race, Brian. No poles.
No poles.
No poles, yeah. But, for 35,000 feet of gain, no poles is no joke. You do feel it, and the up and downhill are pretty bad. And it gets really technical sometimes.
Hmm.
It's
That's right
different
there in
type of
the yeah. That's right there in the. I mean, to bring it back to the states, like that's Hard Rock. I think Hard Rock's 36,000 feet of vertical and 104 miles,
Yeah.
102 miles, or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of elevation profile, exactly. And in terms of technicality, it's a mix of a little bit like hurt, so a lot of
Mm.
mud and roots, but also some of it would be a little bit more like urea or hard rock, where it became more rocky a little bit. So you had
Hmm.
kind of extremes in terms of what made it technical, and then on top of that, we had decently bad weather. It was raining. I don't even remember when it was raining, but it was raining for a big portion of it several times, which made everything slick and wet. And
Mm.
then there's mud, and there's 3,000 people running on there. So like rocks are slippery, and then you could really
Sure.
hurt yourself
Do you remember what the high
very
point was?
quickly. I think that was also surprising. It was about 8 or 9,000 feet, so
Oof, yeah,
pretty
that's a good
high.
yeah. Because you're, I mean, it's an
You
island, so you're probably starting near sea level, if not at sea level.
you start at sea level, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, you start basically like where I live, which is second floor. So you start at like 20 feet, but yeah, you start at sea level, and then you do climb pretty high up there. Enough that I was feeling like not totally out of breath like we are when we do a race like Leadville or being at
Hmm.
12,000, but I was starting to feel it towards the end of like, oh, I'm getting a little out of breath, and I think it's not only because I'm getting tired, but it's also because of the elevation. And the temperature difference was also pretty different between being at sea
Hmm.
level during the day and being up there in the rain at night. Then it was a little bit colder, which is also something you need to kind of be prepared for. It was not dramatic. Like I had just one extra layer for the night, and that was
Hmm.
totally fine. But yeah, the technicality of the course was really what made it challenging, I would say. And the number of people. I
Jeez.
I would be curious to actually know, but we'll never truly know how much faster I would have been doing the same thing, but remove most of the people. Like just
Mm.
clear out the field, so I don't have to wait at aid station. I don't have to wait in a huge conga line.
My gosh.
I would honestly think that I would save something between an hour and a half and 2 hours. Like no joke. It was that bad sometimes. I think I was reflecting on it, and it made me think a little bit of Leadville, where I think it's a great race, and it's been going on for like I think 32 years, 32 editions. So like it's
Hmm.
a great race, historical race that has grown because it's so good, because there's so much that makes this race special, and the community there. You would run in town, and then they would all be there cheering for you. You had a Trail Angel that would set up a fake aid station, or like a self-made aid station, and just
Hmm.
kind of give food and drinks, and it was great. Like you would walk in town before the race, and people would notice you and say, "Hey, you look like a runner. Are you here for Diagonal de Fou?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm here for that." So there's a huge sense of community, making this place special and discovering the island, which is also very special.
Hmm.
But because of that, it grew to a proportion where for me it was just not fun. Like it was too much. I feel, guys, you're doing a great job for a race with 7,000 people. The issue is not how you're dealing with it. The issue is I think you need to reduce the field. I think it's just too much that makes it a little bit less enjoyable. It depends what you're looking for, but
Hmm.
just for example, and I'm bitchy whiny right now, right? That's great. That's because I'm tired. I'm sorry, Diagon de Fou. I still like my experience, but there was the 100K runner that started after us from behind us. So at some point, we're in the middle of the night on a technical downhill, and then you have someone zoom pass by, and you have to get out of the way. Like that's the leader for the 100K. Fine, I move out of the way, no problem. Then the second place, okay, no problem. And 51st place, okay, like they're still semi-pro, no problem. But at some point, it's been 500 to 1,000 runner going by you,
Sure.
and it's getting annoying a little bit to just have to move out of the way all the time. It's a little bit much. Like, is there a way to have these races on different days, or they start before us rather than after us?
Mm.
Like, it felt like we're too many on this trail right now, and it affects what you think about it. And I think I'm definitely not the only one who had noticed that. Or at aid station, for example, volunteers, there's only so much they can do when there's like 200 people coming in at once. You can't really help everyone. You don't have as much food, you don't have as many things. It affects the quality of the experience of everyone.
Hmm.
And I understand, like it's the opposite of that you can do with that would be kind of a hard rock bottle, where, well, there's not too many
Mm.
runner at hard rock. At the same time, we're never going to race it because it's going to take 10 years of applying for it. So finding
Hmm.
the right in between of letting as many people have this great experience, but at the same time not going overboard to the point where people will have difficulty enjoying it, is difficult, because it's going to be exponentially harder. And we talked with Tamara, right, about Leadville. It's becoming exponentially more challenging when you have more runners, because you will have more safety events. Runners don't come by themselves. They have like a crew. They have people driving around. It's just so much harder to do a race of 2,000 people than 200 people. So understanding what the limit would be, and I feel that they just went a little bit above
Mm.
what was the limit. That was my impression. But overall, great experience. Very electric vibe. Huge crowd. The course itself, I wish I could say that it was gorgeous, but I was really unlucky with that, where I was mostly in the clouds or in the rain. I barely
Mm.
saw anything. I saw, like, in the morning twice, maybe for 10 minutes, I saw a view. And I was like, wow, that's really pretty. And we're in the clouds. And then that was over. I was like, ah, man, like, I'll, I'll have to watch YouTube to see what I was supposed to see of the course. So, yeah.
Any significant challenges yourself? You were obviously well, maybe it's not
I
obvious,
had
but you
such
were
a terrible
solo.
race, Brian. I was bitchy and like complaining, and like seriously, like I think the good thing is that, and like I will receive a lot of hate for saying it, but French people are kind of known to complain. So I think I was fitting right in with complaining all the time. Even me right now, I'm being more negative than I would be normally. But no, on the other side, I think everything went pretty poorly for me.
Hmm.
I was trying new shoes from La Sportiva, Prodigo. I didn't really have time to
I
test them
did
more
see
than a
those.
few miles.
They didn't look like they were new shoes by the end, but I saw those. Yeah.
No, they were not new anymore. They're white shoes from the start, and I knew it would look like shit afterwards, and that's okay. But But beyond just the look of it, I think they were a little too tight for me. I think the fit is not true to size. I should have like upgrade by a zero point 0.5 size
Mm.
difference, and it would have felt better. But it's also a 53 hours it took me, and my feet were wet from the rain, and I couldn't change my socks. So I think no matter the shoes I would have had, if I'm not able to take care of my feet properly, you have
Mhm.
blisters, and I had blisters everywhere. Pretty painful one on my heel, on my toes, big toes, small toes, and under the like the plant of the feet, huge
Mm.
ones, and it was extremely painful. Every step was agony basically, and that was really early in the race. So that was
Mm.
bad. Then actually we're gonna talk about Javelina soon, but I don't know you no, you definitely remember that last year at Javelina, my shorts, like the inner ties, kind of like ripped apart at some
Oh
point. And
man, I do remember
yeah,
this because, well, finish the story.
yeah, because I fucking needed shorts because otherwise like I would be bleeding. And then Brian gave me his shorts, which I really appreciate, and then I tried to return them, and for whatever
I was
reason,
like,
it was like, nah,
no,
Simon,
they're yours
you're
now,
good.
Simon. They're yours.
Yeah,
The boys
Christmas
touched
gift,
them.
Simon. You keep them.
The boys touched them, so they're all yours now.
They're all mine. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But obviously, if it's ripping there, it's because that's actually where my ties are like rubbing. So that's the spot where chafing will be really bad. And it ripped apart really early in the race.
Mm. And no
And I didn't
Brian
have any.
shorts. You didn't have my shorts.
Exactly. And I didn't have anyone to kind of change that. So
Mm.
I had to just go through, and yeah, I mean it's painful. Like it was bleeding, of course, at
Ugh.
the end, and it was extremely painful. And it makes every step when I'm landing my feet, it's super painful because of the blisters. Then my
Mhm.
leg rub, it's painful because
Mhm.
the chafing is happening. Um, it made it for a very 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 long day, and also I don't know if it's just that we're used to having really well stuffed aid station in the US, but there were just not as much option at aid station for food
Mm.
or things like that. So drinks was water or Coke, which I love Coke, so that's great, but no electrolyte, for example, so no salt.
Wow.
For food, bananas, apple, orange, cheese, things like that, but not much you could really carry.
Mm.
Like I had to ask for bananas, and sometimes they wouldn't give me one because they don't want you to throw away the peel. Which, like, I obviously don't throw it away, but I understand why. Again, you're 7,000 runner. If you give the bananas, someone is bound to throw it on the trail and kind of pollute. So I understand why it was like that, but that made it difficult for me to fuel because there were just so few options to carry with me. So all in all, low energy because of that. Every step is
Mm.
painful. It was rough. It was really not my best race. Yeah,
Well, jeez, that's
yeah,
uh
yeah.
that's a bummer.
But we
I
made it.
mean, yeah,
We
but you did it. You
we
got it done.
yeah,
You're
we
on
made it,
this.
and I think that's also a big difference between we compared the race experience a little bit, and I would think that the level of pain I had was probably higher than what you had with your Achilles. But at the same time, I'm able to say, look, this is chafing. This is super painful right
Mm.
now, but it's going to be fine in 3 days. So,
Mhm.
like,
It's
I'm
not
able to
debilitating.
say,
Yeah, it's not debilitating.
exactly. And you're able to, right? Like, it's not the like pissing contest, like, oh man, I was in so much more pain. It's more like,
Sure, sure.
it's a
Yeah,
different kind of pain. Like, this is
yeah. Mhm.
hurting, but I know for a fact I'm not hurt right now. And
Mhm.
I can push through that, and that's okay. Like, I will not regret that I'm chafing too much. Like, I regret right now, it's bad right now. And sure, the shower will be painful and like for a few days, but after that, like we're good. There's not gonna be permanent damage to my butthole because like it's fine. Like it's gonna be fine. So I think that's a huge difference, but it definitely does not make it for a super pleasant experience at all. Yeah, and the lesson I have is I don't even know what I could have done differently. I think having a crew would have made the difference because I would have been able to change my socks. I would have been able
Mm.
to get extra shorts, and I would have been able to get food that I can carry with me at every aid station that there is a crew. In fact, what was interesting is usually you're not able to help outside of the aid station, and I'm sure they had these rules. but then like no, that the people were helping outside of aid station all the time, like pretty far outside. We're not talking like 500 feet. We're talking like
Mm-hmm.
we're 3 miles out of the aid station, and then someone will help them,
Mm.
which makes having a crew even better.
Sure, sure.
But
Well, it's an advantage, right? I mean, it's essentially it's an advantage.
and I think for that race it would have been a huge advantage to have a crew. There's no pacer, so the crew would be really just a crew, but
Mm.
you have more support. And then the problem that really made my race so difficult. To be fair, it would still have been pretty difficult, but chafing I would have solved like this. Blisters, it would not have happened because I would have changed my socks frequently. But now I really only had two drop bag. One was at it's in kilometers, so mile 50, and the other one was maybe mile 100 or maybe 95. So
Mm.
or maybe 90. So like it wouldn't have really changed anything
Sure.
because it was too late. But yeah, otherwise pretty cool race. Really proud to have done this one, and I think it does go in my top few most difficult race. I wish I could redo it and see how I would feel with better condition, like without the
Mm-hmm.
rain, without having the blisters. I really think I would have done closer to a 45 hours. I think that would be a more realistic time. Like I think that was a clear underperformance by me.
Mm-hmm.
And usually if you take 8 extra hours, these are not fun extra hours. It's because things are going massively wrong, and they were going massively wrong, but not in an injury kind of way, more in a kind of this is painful type of way. And the good news was that I do appreciate that the race does, like, yeah, you lose a lot of time being stuck in people, but you do have 66 hours. So
Mm.
even though it is a very technical course and a very challenging course, I think that the cutoff is decently generous. Um, if we would compare, let's say, to a Leadville where you only have 30 hour, I feel that the cutoff is the opposite. The course itself is not really tough, but for a
Mm-hmm.
30 hour, that's kind of tight. Yeah, you always have to keep pushing. Diagonal de Fou 66 hour is extremely generous. Like even
Mm-hmm.
60 hour would be pretty generous on what I've seen. And I don't know what's the DNF rate, but I wouldn't be surprised to learn that it's like 30% DNF rate, which is not so
Mm-hmm.
much for a 100 mile, especially a challenging course like that. But course wise, yeah, it was up there in the Ure Hurt Tour des Géants level of difficulty. This is not for people that are not used to trail running. You will really, really struggle on the downhill.
Yeah, especially without poles. I mean, I know I'm not a fan of it, but you use them, and so how did that go for you? Did you see any issues with that?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think on the downhill it made it pretty difficult. Sometimes having the pole helps you, especially when there's kind of big step. I use that and to reduce or alleviate the pressure on my knees. Not having it made it much harder. And on the
Mm-hmm.
climb, for sure, 35,000 feet of gain is a lot. And using your poles and your upper body to support you
Mm-hmm.
would have made a huge difference. So
Yeah,
yeah, that was actually a big deal. At the
yeah,
same time, like I understand why they banned them, and I think it is the right decision to ban them. Like if I try to say like what they do right and wrong, the poll thing is not something that they do wrong. I think too many people is something they should look into. But the polls, first, the trail are decently sensitive over there, so I think with 7,000 people, it would really mess up the trail, something bad. Also, I think there is a difference in trail etiquette that I'm noticing a little bit more now that this is my second European race, so maybe I was just
sure.
unlucky. But if I compare to the US, I think in the US we're much more prone to. Actually, I can ask you that if you would agree. But if you're walking on a single track and then there's a runner coming behind you who's running, they don't even need to ask. Like, you will get out of the way. Like, that's by default. You don't need to ask, but you could ask and you will get out of the way. Over there, not so much apparently. I was even once I was like I was running. I catch up to something and I told him, hey, like, can I pass on your left? And then he just didn't respond and he kept like reusing the whole trail. And it's not we were on a cliff. Like, he could have moved. Then I was like, okay, I guess not. Continued walking and trying to squeeze my way out, but it almost felt like he was deliberately blocking me.
Mm.
Like as soon as there was an opening, I felt that he was moving towards that like
Huh.
opening.
Yeah, yeah.
And later on I was like, can I pass you left? I was like, there's no room. I was like, there is plenty of room. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what are you like?
Mm-hmm.
whereas I feel that in the US it would be the opposite. Like you would move out of the way. Nora, when she's pacing me, there will be someone like way the fuck out there, like a mile away. And it's like, Simon, there's someone, we should move to the side. I was like, Nora, wait for them to be a little closer. But yes, I will move out of the way because
Sure.
we need to share the trail and
Yeah.
I don't want to block anyone. You're feeling good right now. You're able to run. I don't want to break your stride. Like just the fact that you would need to stop behind me to walk sometimes is enough to kind of you're done running. So you do that so that once it's your turn, it happens. It didn't feel that way. And I think that with the poles, it would have made kind of sneaking your way around people pretty challenging. So, and that would probably lead to some hazard a little bit and some tripping a little bit. So it was good that they banned them.
I think, I think your reference about the trail etiquette, something that we both experienced and maybe others that listened have, is the backside of Hope Pass. It's really narrow, and from the turnaround from Winfield and back up, fortunately, there's no pacers at that point, which has taken the congestion a ton down. Obviously, 50%, right? I mean, if half the people had pacers, then there's, I don't know, 800 runners, and now there's 400 pacers on the trail potentially, right? Those are odd numbers, but anyway. But the trail is really narrow and it's really steep, and so the front runners are coming at you as you're still making your way out. And it's a narrow trail, and you're not going to fall to your death, but you're going to slide down a slope and maybe run into a tree. There's some areas that are a little funky, right? But yeah, as soon as you're coming up on somebody, I mean, it's almost like unspoken knowledge. Like I just step 1 foot to the right, they step 1 foot to the right. We rub shoulders for a split second, and then we just shift past each other in like this weird dance. And it's just kind of like, and that's the forward and backwards passing. But yeah, you're right. If I'm coming up on somebody, I'm like, it's almost like in stateside. I mean, it's so common that we're asking like, do you want to pass when you hear the footsteps coming behind you?
I was doing that, and people were so freaking confused with me. I would hear them coming, and I would say, "Hey, do you want to pass? Like, or let me know when you want to pass me." And they were like, like, what's going on here?" I was like, "Yeah, I mean, I'll let you pass. Like, don't worry about it. You don't have to kind of push me on the side like of the cliff. Like, I'll let you pass. That's totally fine."
Yeah. Interesting.
Hope Pass is a good example though, because I think there's also, there's in theory, this is the priority. So in theory, the hiker that is going up has priority over the hiker going down. But when we're, for example, coming down Hope Pass, especially if you're like in the sub 25 hours, you'll get passed by people going up that are the lead. And I'm like, no, I mean, you're the lead. I'm getting the way out. Like, I really don't want to slow down the lead or like the kind of elite to sub elite runners. Like, I'll get out of the way. But what's interesting also is then eventually it flips around where we're the one coming up. And then the people coming down are the one that I was like, man, like, I don't know if you can make it, but you're tight. Like, I don't want to slow you down. And like people, even though we're ahead of them technically, and sometimes like we're the one hiking up, we're like, no, like you take all the space. Like, I want you to like try and make it. Like you're tight right now. And I don't want you to slow down by 5 seconds. Like, it could make the difference for you. Whereas for me, I'm mid-pack. Like, it really doesn't change anything.
5 seconds for 200 people. I mean, that adds up over time. That could be 10, 15 minutes. That could be your cutoff at Winfield to where you're taking the bus out.
Exactly. And it's heartbreaking when you do that Hope Pass. Like, when you're climbing back up and you see them going down, like there's a transition at some point where you see it in their eyes. Like, first they're hopeful, then eventually they're doubtful, and then at some point they're desperate. And like the desperate one, usually they're the one getting out of the way. They know they're out. But the one that are tight a little bit, and you're like, oh man, like I was at Winfield about 30 minutes ago, and you have about like say 40 minutes. Like, that's tight. I want you to make it. And you know that some of them will make it. Like, some of them will actually go all the way to 6th Avenue, and that's great. And some of them will not, but they need all the help they can get. And if me getting out of the way helps them get there, most definitely we're doing that. And I really appreciate that. And I did not feel that way at Diagon de Fou. Let's just say it like that.
So I want to back up just a quick second. I know we're way over time, but anyway.
We're way over time, yeah.
I mean, it sounds like a small island. I don't know what the population is. I don't know what the size of this island is, but you got 7,000 people. Probably a majority of them are visiting, just like yourself, like from not from the island. So, like, what were the accommodations like? Was everything overrun? Was it sort of? I mean, I hate to keep using Leadville as a reference, but like when the hundred Leadville hundred shows up to Leadville, like we just overwhelm town. Like the restaurants can't handle it. Everything is just swamped. There's nowhere to stay. Everyone's camping in the middle of the woods in some weird nook that they picked out 3 days beforehand. So, like, is that an issue at Diagonal as
It
well?
was not. I didn't notice it. I
Mm-hmm.
got an Airbnb and it was really
Mm.
easy and decently cheap actually.
Okay.
I think I actually took the cheapest Airbnb on the island, but that was not too bad. And I think on
Mm.
the island there, I don't know the population, but I wouldn't be surprised to hear that there's at least 500,000.
Oh, it's a
Um,
big island then. Okay.
it's a decently big island. I was surprised by the size of. So I was staying in Saint Denis, which is where the race finishes, and it's a decent sized town. I don't know the number, and maybe a listener
Hmm.
knows, but like my guess is like 100,000, and it
Oh,
was not the
yeah,
only kind of
big
city
town,
or
sure.
town of that size.
Hmm.
I think there was
Yeah, yeah.
also Saint Pierre,
It's
which
a
was
it's a
pretty big, or
large
Saint
island
Paul.
then. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
so
not your little tiny.
decent size,
Yeah.
but at the same time, you do notice the runner. Like it is a big happening on the island. Um, so it didn't feel like we're overwhelming the island, but at the same time, you are a significant portion of the people that are
Hmm.
going around to the point where when we took the flight, the stewardess, do we say stewardess or hair hostess? I mean, I want to say the polite form. I'm just not
Yeah.
English
A
enough to know which
Stewart,
is the
I think it's
steward. Okay, well,
yeah.
the steward said something like it was in French. I'm freestyle translating here, but said something to like, oh, like we noticed that there's a lot of runner. We're assuming you're going for Diagonal de Fou. We're wishing you good luck. It's gonna be fun. And we also noticed that there's a lot of newlywed on their honeymoon. We want to wish you a very good luck in this very challenging endeavor. And I like the contrast was interesting. Like the race, the 100 mile was the fun thing, and
Yeah.
getting married was like,
The
man, you guys are
challenge.
kind of
Yeah,
nuts.
yeah.
Like you're gonna struggle. I don't know why you would do something like that, but it's kind of cute to think like, yeah, they took the time to say that in the flight. So they
Mhm.
were aware of that. At the airport, there was a small reception for people
Mm.
coming in for the race,
Nice.
which is that's a nice touch. Like people, I could really feel that people really cared about this race, and I really really appreciate that part of it. Which I hope all the negative, me being French and complaining about it, I hope people don't see that as a sign that it's not a good race. I think it is such a good race that it became to a level where you're at the edge of like be careful like to not lose your what makes you special, essentially. Just like Leadville, like if it's too big, are you losing what makes Leadville
Mm.
Leadville? And
Sure,
same thing
sure.
with Diagonal de Fou. Very special
Mm.
race, very special course, great
Mhm.
island, great people. And then you need to ask yourself, like, are we becoming a shit show or not?
Yeah, two questions. One is they're related to the aid stations. You mentioned that there was that you thought there was a lack of food compared to what you've experienced,
Yeah.
obviously stateside here. Um, what was the distance between them? Was it comparable to other hundreds? And was it
It
one
was pretty
continuous
close
loop?
actually. Yeah.
Was it
So
one
it was
continuous loop as
about
well?
yeah, it was pretty close. It was about like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 miles. Like so 5 to 10 miles, I would
Good.
say. But it's good to keep in mind that some of these time wise were pretty far apart because it's so technical or so steep
Mm.
that there's a good amount of time. But a water capacity of 1.5 liter was plenty enough. And
Hmm.
yeah, and I think what was good with Aid Station, as much as like it was difficult, especially at the beginning, to get anything, most of them, especially towards the end, had a sleep station. You had
Mm.
bigger aid station that they call life base, just like at the Tour des
Mhm.
Géants, where you had drop bags. And I expected that only these would have beds, but actually no. That almost every aid station towards the end had like a significant number of cots where you could sleep.
Mhm.
Not necessarily the best sleeping condition. Like one, for example, the cots were straight up like we're pretty high in the mountain and they're out there, no tent, like they're out there. And then it starts raining. I was like, yo, you should not go sleep. Like you'll be hypothermic. Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
get the heck out of there. Like why don't you have a tent? That was just odd a
yeah.
little
Oh,
bit.
sleep
Um,
under the cot, right? You like use the
yeah,
cot as
yeah. I mean,
the.
seriously, like it was like why don't you have a tent here? That's just interesting. There was
Hmm.
another one where it's a tropical island. People are very festive and like a lot of energy, and they love music like reggaeton or these sorts of upbeat music. You had this huge speaker like right next to where I was sleeping, and like you could feel like the beat of the music in your heart. I was like, I don't think I can sleep. Like, this is my second night being up, and I'm basically passed out, but like, I'm not gonna be able to sleep right now. But still, I really appreciate that they had beds all the time. But despite that, a lot of people were. That's also something I had never seen before. And we cut after that. We had to have a safety blanket, which is normal for a race like that. But I had almost never seen anyone using it. Whereas over there, it was extremely standard to just you rip it open and then you sleep on the side of the trail in it and even walk on it. The annoying part was that these are pretty like they rip apart very easily.
Hmm.
These blanket like it's not made for that. So
Sure.
you had like pieces of blankets
Mm.
everywhere on the trail. Like it was kind of trashy a little bit, and that made me
Mm.
think of like the banana thing, thinking like, yeah, it's annoying me that you don't want me to take a banana on the go. At the same time, I can see how 7,000 people would kind of mess it up a little bit. And that was
Hmm.
happening with the safety blanket, where, man, like, I wonder if, like, you should almost say, like, you can only use it in a safety situation rather than just for your sleepy, like, kind of situation. And or, like, you should really limit the amount of sleep that you do on the trail. But that's difficult to control. But
Sure.
yeah,
You
it
got it
was,
done.
I got
I
it
don't.
done.
I know Europe's not huge on buckles. I think that's an American thing. So no
Yeah,
buckle.
so
Did
again,
you get
it's
it?
a
Did you?
European
Are you
race.
gonna
They
make
don't give
yourself a? Are you
buckle,
gonna make
but
yourself a
I did get
buckle?
one actually. You're right. Guys, it's not even fun. I got this. I don't know if we can see it.
Yeah, right there looks good.
It's
Yeah,
like
that's it.
a boat with a giant octopus because I couldn't find anything that was anywhere even remotely related to the island, so I had to pick something random.
Did you buy it at
But
least on the island? Did you buy that on the island?
no, I don't know where I would find a belt buckle on the island. So yeah, I had to buy it online, and I was looking for like Volcano Island or things like
Mm,
that, and everything I was getting was like clearly written Hawaii, and I was like,
mm.
that like if the word Hawaii was not written on it, maybe it would pass. But with the huge like Hawaii, I was like, that's
Yeah,
not
not the same
appropriate.
feel. Not the same feel.
No. At the same time, I still got the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle buckle for Japan, which
Hmm.
is also not exactly the most related. Although I
And
do
then
have like a
the
Japan.
pizza one somewhere else too.
Yeah, the pizza one is here, the Teenage Mutant Ninja, but I do have one that is actually like a Fuji Mountain here. So like that one, I actually got something relevant. But yeah,
All right, all
I
right.
got my buckle. No
Excellent,
worries, we're
excellent.
good.
Well, great job.
Yeah, yeah.
Recovering. How are you recovering?
Uh,
I mean, you guys got home
It's
yesterday. I
still
mean, like
painful. It's still
yeah.
painful. I just flew back. I arrived yesterday evening.
Hmm.
Again, it's like 36 hour flying back. So
Ugh.
like I'm still tired, but and I need some sleepy time. But I think I'll be fine because we're actually gonna meet very soon. This weekend, we're going to Javelina 100, which for me is just a small drive, 5 6 hours. I wonder, maybe it is around 240 miles from where I live. I would need
You
to check
should
that out.
Google that or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be
Um,
ready for it. I'm pretty sure.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm looking forward to hanging out with you guys. I'll be there as well. I'm driving out on Thursday night. I'm trying to, I don't know, maybe push the pace a little bit in the driving so I could do the shakeout run, the Hoka shakeout run on Friday. Um,
Mm.
I got some athletes I'm helping. I got some athletes on our team that are racing 100K and the 100 miler. And I got a ton of friends that'll be there. You guys, some others. I'm also volunteering. I'll be riding the bicycle, mountain bike with a GoPro for Jam Jam for Jamil Curry and the media team on lap one with the lead pack of men, I believe. Um, so that
Damn.
so I'm almost a little more nervous about the biking part of it.
Yeah,
I
I don't know if
clean.
you can keep up, man. These guys, they go really fast.
Well, I was
You're
just
in for a
listening.
ride.
I think maybe on lap one they're going to go about 6 or 7 minute miles, which is a 10 mile an hour pace, which on a bicycle isn't that fast. But a little bit of incline, and it's not like a huge road. I mean, like it's barely a 2 track in spots. So I'm just trying to figure out
Yeah,
how I'm
it's
going to
not.
stay around there.
I would be able to mountain bike this, so I think you will be totally fine.
Yeah, yeah.
If I can mountain bike it, like it's not too bad. But I don't know if I would be able to keep up with them necessarily sometimes. But yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so the golden ticket race, I mean, lap one, I think there's going to be anyone that's a hopeful is going to try to go out gunning for lap one. So it'll be
Balls to the
interesting.
walls for
It'll be
sure.
fun.
Do you know
Yeah.
who's the top few guys going there?
Yeah, you got David Roach, who set the course record at Leadville this year. He's
Yep.
showing up with some good fitness. It sounds like on the female side, there's a lot of golden ticket recipients in the past. Probably four of them, I thought, but they weren't the first on the podium. They were like seconds or rolled down to them on third place.
Hmm.
So yeah, just something. Um, so basically, the females race could be one of five basically, essentially. So yeah, some good excitement there. So always fun to follow that. And as much as I love Javelina, it's always. I mean, I guess always. Last year it seemed like it was super fast, and then we're like out of there. Like it's like 25
Yeah.
hours, and I'm just getting back in the car and driving back to Colorado. So
Yeah.
as much fun as it's going to be, it's a super quick trip, quite honestly.
Yeah. I mean, same for us. We're probably gonna drive Thursday evening, like arrive around midnight, work Friday from probably Starbucks, and then like we're out Sunday morning.
Hmm.
But the race is actually like it. It's funny because I did Saddles 100. Okay, we were, I don't know, let's call it 30 people doing the 100 mile. Then I did the 3,000 runner, and then we're gonna do Javelina, where the first few times I did it was a few hundreds, and now it's a pretty big race. Like it's getting to me, it's getting to that edge of. I said that to Jam Jam. I feel bad, Jam Jam. I love the race, but I said it's becoming a shit show a little bit, especially in the first morning. You know, when you try and set up a crew and you need to park all the way out there. I
Mm.
think they're doing still a great job. I think they're at the edge of if you let more people in, it's gonna be tricky, but it is very electric as a vibe, and I think that makes it pretty unique. Do you have a costume? You don't have to tell me what the costume is, though. But I'm curious.
I'm still working on it. I'm going to go thrift store shopping tomorrow. How about yourself?
Yeah, of course I have one. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the
Well,
whole point.
I'm just hoping that because there's so many people there that I'm going to be able to pick you out of the crowd, Simon.
I think my costume will help with that. Do you know or?
I do know.
Oh,
Nora and I
okay.
were talking. So
Nora, come on, Nora. Oh man, I cannot trust her with any secret. Although she's the one who had the idea, so I guess, yeah, that's fine. Forgiven. But yeah,
yes. So yeah, I hope
cool.
I could spot you in the crowd. You never know. I'll keep looking.
Yep, that's a good clue. All right.
Hey, thanks, Simon. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll let you go. We've been on for a while. We've obviously just been rambling about our last updates. We got, again, a Javelina this weekend. And then I think it's some downtime for you after that, isn't it?
Yeah, nothing planned for a while, but I
Slows
might
down a
fill
little
it
bit.
up with
Yeah.
a few things.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, great. We'll see you this weekend. Look forward to next week. We'll have Chase Hammond on. He finished the Triple Crown that we were mentioning in the beginning of the episode. He finished the Triple Crown of 200s. He's also a race director himself. He also has a supplement company. So it should be a great episode. I'm looking forward to recording next week. We'll put that out midweek as well. So we'll record that after we get back from Javelina. Have a great week, guys.
Yeah. All right.